Hey guys, so the first chunk of this episode provided a moment of reflection for all the characters, and honestly, maybe it's just because these are my favorite moments in the series, but whenever we get stuff like this, I often just want entire episodes sometimes, just focus on that simple concept, because we are always learn something interesting about the characters through that just kind of calm introspection. And I'll be honest, even though I'm still not the biggest fan of Anna, I do admit I'm strangely finding myself more invested in her and Yo's relationship just through that one single moment between them. And I think the Seiyu played Anna just on a how just played Anna on a generally better level. Honestly, does a lot more to show just her more vulnerable and caring side of her in this moment. Um, with that said, though, the episode also gives us Yo's first encounter with Hao and the strength of his guard. And this whole episode is, in some ways, is just a flex of how strong the spirit of fire, which is guardian ghost, really is. Which, yeah, that thing packs a real punch. And I do like how, well, this is a great villain introduction for our heroes to know who Hao is and that he's out there now. It also gives us an even larger measuring stick of just how much more powerful they need to grow. And I'll be honest, this is where I feel the very first scene of the first episode provides a bit of a detriment to the reboot, because even though we still have a lot more to cover, like we already covered a whole shit ton of how in this episode, but believe it or not, we still have a lot more. It's and even though we still have a lot more to do with his character, we already knew the baseline connection of Hao and Yo's relationship, so that part of it's a little spoiled. Again, we still got a lot more in order to dive into, but yeah, we kind of already know what the relationship is, especially for those who've also watched the original anime. Um, the interesting thing about it, however, is how Yo will develop as we move forward, as he learns even more about Hao. Now, with that said, I do need to talk about the Seiyu that they got to voice Hao, because supposedly from the research I did, the same voice actor who voiced Hao in the in the original anime also makes a return here in the reboot, and that's where I become a little bit more mixed about Hao's reintroduction, because on one hand, or at least when it comes to the performance, because on one hand, it's got to be extremely hard to play a youthful character while also giving that same character a very sinister and intimidating vocal presence. And there are elements of that intimidation, of that just sense of pure evil in Hao. But in but when we get to but the thing is, when we get to the moments of the more sort of, I don't know what you call them, laissez faire, easy, just kind of sitting back and having a casual conversation kind of moments, it feels like the Seiyu kinda didn't. It almost feels like a little bit of intimidation is lost, because only because I'm not sensing as much of that intimidation anymore, and maybe that's part of it, that he's such a powerful person that even when he's just having a casual conversation, we should still fear him. But I don't know. I can't. It's one of those where I just couldn't sense it in the performance. Whenever we had those moments, and the thing is, I can't even chalk it up to how acting condescending, because the inflection of the voice sounds a little off, even a little off for that, and and also and the actor just does better of tapping into that condescension and that natural evil, weirdly, when she is tapping into the more sinister elements of the character. So yeah, I don't know. I don't hate the performance, but it's just a weirdly mixed bag for me, honestly. Um, of course, we get the big reveal. Of course, we take a dive into the past, and we learn a lot about Hao in this episode. And one of the big reveals we get is that the current Hao is basically one of many that have existed throughout history, and Hao, as a individual, as a person, has been reincarnating himself throughout key moments of history. And this is, I think, the moment in the series as a whole where I realized just how unique an antagonist Hao actually is. Because unless you can completely strip Hao of his abilities of reincarnation, then there really is no stopping him. He's the epitome of the term everlasting. As like it really doesn't matter if you kill him. He will return again. And there's just he will return again over and over and over. Every time you keep killing him, he will still keep returning. And there's just something truly foreboding about a villain that can never truly be killed or his legacy destroyed. It's always ever present and always there, even when he's not around. And that in itself is terrifying, that a single person has that kind of influence. And has that kind of influence or that kind of ability to begin with. Now, with that said, I do admit I think I prefer. With that said, I think the person showing Yo and his friends all this. Her name is Lilirara. I kind of like the way she was. I kind of prefer the way that she was convinced to help Yo and the others in the original anime more than the reboot. Because in that scenario in the original, she was kind of forced to let go of the past and kind of just trust that the new generation with the future. But here it's like Horo just said his dream out loud, and boom, she was convinced to help him. Like, yeah, just there's a little bit of a sudden transition there that I felt we needed just a little bit more build up to. And again, we kind of, again, it's something that I think was done better. That build up was done better in the original anime. Although on the other side, the reboot did give her a much more gruesome end at the hands of Hao, and just again reinforcing just how much of a true force of evil he is in the world. And yeah, obviously the other big thing about this episode is that in the midst of their journey, everyone's already basically got dropped in the middle of nowhere and has to take it the rest of the way on foot towards the tournament site. And honestly, this is not only from here where the series really starts to pick up steam, but also where the differences and changes from the original anime become more noticeable. And in the case of this recent episode, it happened for the better, because for the most part, because even though I understand that at the time the original anime did have the unfortunate pleasure of having to do things differently because the manga wasn't fully finished at the time. At the same time, we're already kind of seeing in this episode that despite it only having begun the journey, the pacing of the journey itself to get to Patch Village has already improved leaps and bounds compared to the original anime, where I think it took a good it took them God knows how many episodes to get to the village in the original, and then squeezed in a lot in the last 10, 15 episodes. But so yeah, there's already, just within this episode, there's already a huge improvement over pacing, and I'm definitely glad it's not going to take us as long in order to get to Patch Village as it did in the original anime. But on a more lighter note, I also love how the running gag of Ryu using his oversoul as a giant hitchhiker thumbs up was kept in. Like, that shit was always hilarious to me. But we also get a deep dive into the past, which not only explores the mystery of who Hao is, but even though a large chunk of what Yo and the others experienced was just another test, I like how it kind of further pushed a lot more of the unsettling questions about the nature of the tournament itself, as well as building up just how much the Patch Tribes themselves, as well as building up just the question of how much the Patch Tribes themselves can be trusted. The best part is that this isn't something that's like building off of nothing. These uncertainties, for as unsettling as they may be, have also been built upon the foundation from the very beginning of the series. Because even though the information and the stuff we're learning about the nature of the Shaman fights is new, it's also building upon just a lot of the shady decisions the patch drivers have made just in the short time throughout the series, like allowing Ren to move on despite actively killing Crom. And this is stuff they have, and really this is stuff we see they have kind of continued to condone all throughout history. Although, as shown, the practices and ethics within the Shaman tournament itself was far worse, was honestly far more lenient and worse back then. And I do like how, even though we're told of the purpose behind the Shaman fights, which is to create this giant kingdom for the Shaman, for the Shaman population, the episode still kind of leaves it open on how true that is in order for our heroes to kind of learn the actual truth. Like, even if it is the truth, there's always another side to things, and you do wonder what the other side to this idea is. But yeah, guys, that's all I got for this review. If you enjoyed the video, like, comment, subscribe, follow me on Twitter, Analyst Principal, and be sure to hit the notification bell for notifications, and just share the video around, guys. Dead Knight of Anime, signing off. Later.